Imagine standing on a frozen road in the dead of winter, the world around you trembling under the weight of a war too vast for any one mind to grasp. The battlefield stretches beyond the horizon, columns of tanks grinding forward, infantry pushing through snow that swallows their boots, aircraft slicing the sky like steel predators. But beneath all this fury, beneath the explosions, beneath the roaring engines, something else decides the fate of millions. Something invisible, something quiet, something so ordinary that most never notice it until it fails. Picture a single truck sputtering to a halt on that same frozen road, its fuel lines clogged, its cargo a crate of spare parts stuck miles from where it is desperately needed. Now picture 10 trucks, 100, 1,000. Imagine an entire army slowly choking, not from enemy fire, but from missing the threads that keep a war machine alive. Fuel, food, ammunition, repair crews, cold weather gear, tires, rails, ships, depots, clerks scribbling numbers through the night. Imagine victory slipping away, not because a general made the wrong choice, but because a single supply line snapped at the wrong hour. This is the unseen battlefield. This is where wars are won long before shots are fired. Welcome, history warriors, I'm Knightley. You're about to witness history like never before. And now, step with me into the world's greatest conflict, where logistics became the shadow king of war context. World War II did not erupt in a single place. It unfolded like a planetary storm stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the icy forests of Eastern Europe, from the Atlantic shipping lanes to the sprawling Pacific. Nations clashed not only with tanks and aircraft, but with entire industrial systems grinding behind them. Germany surged across continents with lightning-fast offensives. The Soviet Union fought for survival across thousands of miles. Britain held the line under relentless pressure, and the United States, its factories roaring day and night, entered the conflict with a level of production the world had never seen. Yet beneath this global fury, one truth lurked. The battlefield wasn't just land, sea, or sky. It was every warehouse, every railway junction, every port struggling to feed the insatiable appetite of modern mechanized war. Germany began the war with blazing momentum, driven by well-drilled troops and tightly coordinated operations. But their supply network stretched across continents. It was never designed to cover strained with every new advance. Fuel tankers lagged behind tanks. Spare parts failed to reach broken engines. Winter gear arrived too late to meet the cold, and every mile deeper into Russia tightened the noose around their logistics. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union relied on sheer-scale vast territories, deep reserves, and a rail network hammered but unbroken. Their factories, uprooted and rebuilt far east of German bombers, churned out weapons even under unimaginable pressure. Across the oceans, the United States mastered the art of logistical warfare. It built ships faster than enemies could sink them, produced trucks by the hundreds of thousands, and delivered food, fuel, and vehicles in quantities that reshaped entire fronts. Britain became the vital bridge and island fortress that transformed into a massive staging ground for supplies flowing into Europe, North Africa, and beyond. Every bomb dropped, every tank deployed, every soldier fed depended on the invisible arteries stretching around the globe. Lose those arteries, and the most powerful armies would wither. And so, as the world plunged into its darkest years, the real battlefield expanded far beyond trenches and front lines. It reached into factories lit by welding sparks, docks crowded with crates, rail lines stretching through bombed-out landscapes. The calm before chaos was nothing more than the quiet hum of machines preparing for a storm that would test not just armies, but entire nations' ability to keep their war machines alive. The stakes were absolute. The storm was coming. Strategic build-up. Before the first shot was fired on many fronts of World War II, a quieter war unfolded in meeting rooms, underground bunkers, and military headquarters. This was the war of planning. Charts spread across tables, maps pinned with colored markers, logistics officers arguing over numbers that would decide life or death. Commanders imagined sweeping arrows across continents, but behind each arrow lurked a question more decisive than firepower. Can we sustain this? Germany believed it could. Its generals envisioned fast, crushing offensives, short campaigns solved before their supply lines unraveled. Blitzkrieg dazzled the world, but even in its earliest victories, Warning lights flickered in the background. Fuel consumption far higher than predicted. Trucks wearing down faster than factories could replace them. Rails struggling under constant strain. Yet no one stopped. No one slowed. The war machines were already in motion. German High Command, OKH and OKW, operated with confidence bordering on fatalism. They saw logistics as a support act, not the lead. Their mindset was shaped by earlier wars where infantry marched and horses pulled ammunition. But World War II wasn't a war of horses. It was a war of engines. A panzer division burned fuel like a hungry furnace. A single day of rapid advance consumed thousands of liters. If fuel faltered, mobility collapsed. Commanders like Guderian and Manstein were brilliant operational thinkers, restless innovators, who saw warfare as a chessboard of rapid thrusts and sudden collapses. But even they privately worried about sustaining long drives into massive territories. Hitler, driven by ambition and ideology, demanded speed above all. He believed willpower outweighed logistics. Yet the deeper the Wehrmacht pushed, the longer its fragile supply tether stretched across hostile lands. Across the English Channel, British planners played a different game. For them, logistics wasn't background noise, it was survival. An island empire depended entirely on shipping. Every shell, every ration tin, every spare part crossed dangerous waters, stalked by submarines. So Britain built a defensive logistical shield: convoy systems, escort ships, code breakers at Bletchley Park, tracking U-boat packs. Winston Churchill monitored shipping numbers with obsession. Tonnage lost, tonnage built, routes threatened. Without supplies, Britain would starve long before its armies faltered. This sharpened minds. Operations had to be feasible, sustainable, and meticulously planned. British commanders, Montgomery, Brooke, Auchinleck, were cautious by German standards, but their caution came from respect for logistical reality. They refused to fight battles they couldn't supply. And though critics called it slow, that discipline would later become a decisive advantage. Meanwhile, in the vast Soviet Union, logistics hinged on something paradoxical: destruction. As German armies advanced, Soviet leaders ordered factories dismantled and moved deep eastward. Thousands of machines packed on trains, driven across the Urals, and rebuilt under snowstorms and shortages. It was one of history's greatest industrial migrations. Commanders like Zhukov and Rokossovsky were hardened, analytical, able to think in scales nearly unimaginable. They knew their strategy required time to rebuild, time to produce, time to reorganize shattered armies, time bought by the harsh Russian space that swallowed invaders whole. The Red Army relied heavily on railroads, endless steel arteries connecting front to factory. Even when bombed, the rails were repaired with brutal speed. Soviet logistical philosophy mirrored their geography: depth, resilience, and sacrifice. They could afford setbacks because their supply lines grew shorter while the enemies stretched into oblivion. Then came the United States, the giant whose logistics would redefine modern war. American factories were not just productive, they were unprecedented. Assembly lines never slept. Automobiles, refrigerators, and farm equipment gave way to tanks, jeeps, aircraft engines, cargo ships. Generals like Eisenhower, Marshall, and Patton understood something simple but revolutionary. You cannot win a global war without drowning the battlefield in supplies. So, America built a war machine designed not just to fight but to overwhelm. They produced trucks faster than any nation could destroy them. They built Liberty ships in weeks instead of months. They standardized parts so repairs became fast, predictable, routine. U.S. logistical doctrine had one principle: abundance. Not enough fuel, mountains of fuel. Not enough ammo, oceans of ammo. Enough vehicles to keep an army moving even if thousands broke down daily. This abundance reshaped every front. Yet before these global forces collided in titanic battles, plans had to be laid. Detailed, sprawling plans. Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, was a logistical gamble layered on top of ambition. The Wehrmacht expected victory within months, long before winter arrived. Their supply estimates relied on assumptions: good roads, captured Soviet fuel, short campaigns. British and American planners, preparing future offensives like Torch, Overlord, or the Burma campaign, built massive logistical frameworks first. Ports, depots, repair shops, medical stations, rail conversions, everything had to exist before a single soldier set foot on enemy soil. The Soviet Union, preparing for counteroffensives like the one at Stalingrad or Kursk, mobilized entire cities to produce the materials needed. Trains moved non-stop. Factories worked despite shortages. Civilians endured unimaginable hardship to keep the Red Army armed. Every plan was a logistical heartbeat, waiting to accelerate. Now let's look at key commanders whose personalities shaped decisions. Erich von Manstein, cold, precise, a master of operational brilliance. He valued mobility, but often clashed with leadership that ignored logistical limits. Heinz Guderian, impulsive, gifted, utterly convinced of mechanized warfare's future. He understood engines better than most generals, but underestimated the scale of supply his ideas required. Georgy Zhukov, unyielding, methodical, a commander who balanced ruthlessness with clarity. He respected logistics deeply. His offensives relied on overwhelming preparation. Dwight D. Eisenhower, calm, diplomatic, skilled at coordinating vast multinational operations. Logistics wasn't just a tool to him, it was the backbone of his entire command style. George Patton, aggressive, relentless, demanding constant fuel to feed his armored thrusts. His genius flourished only when logistical support kept up. These men fought on different fronts, but one truth shaped them all. An army moves as far as its supply lines allow. Technology also shaped logistical strategy. Germany relied heavily on horses. Over half the Wehrmacht's transport was animal-drawn. This created staggering delays and vulnerability to weather. Their trucks, built by various manufacturers, used inconsistent parts, maintenance nightmares. The panzers were fearsome, but fuel-hungry. The Soviet Union relied on robust, simple designs. T-34 tanks that handled mud, cold and rough terrain with fewer breakdowns. Their Katyusha rocket trucks were easy to maintain. The United States brought standardization, one type of truck dominating the war, the iconic GMC Deuce and a Half, a vehicle that transformed supply operations. And then there were rails. Rails defined entire campaigns. Whoever controlled rail junctions controlled the flow of war. In Russia, wide-gauge tracks forced invaders to convert lines manually, delaying supplies by days or weeks. In Western Europe, Allied bombing crippled German rail networks. Technology didn't just shape combat, it shaped the pace of logistics. Weapons also demanded specific logistical solutions. Tanks needed fuel, spare tracks, lubricants. Artillery required endless shells. Infantry needed food, boots, winter clothing, medical kits. Aircraft needed high-octane gasoline, parts, airfields, trained crews. Germany struggled to balance production. High-quality weapons consumed immense resources, but existed in limited numbers. The Soviets favored quantity and simplicity. The Americans achieved both through industrial scale. This difference would echo into every major campaign. The question was never just who had the best tank or the deadliest aircraft. The true question was, who can keep them running longer? That question shaped the strategic build-up on every front. In North Africa, logistics became destiny. Rommel, the desert fox, was brilliant tactically, but trapped in a logistical nightmare. Supplies for the Africa Corps crossed the Mediterranean, waters patrolled by Allied ships and aircraft. Every sunk tanker was a blow. Fuel shortages defined his strategies. He often fought battles not for terrain but for supply depots. The British, under Auchinleck and later Montgomery, built a stronger logistical base. Ports at Alexandria, the Suez supply corridor, extensive rail support. This foundation eventually allowed them to strike at El Alamein with crushing force. Rommel's genius couldn't counter empty fuel tanks. In the Eastern Front build-up toward Barbarossa, railway planning took center stage. German officers calculated fuel needs, ammunition requirements, food rations, yet their estimates assumed rapid victory. Few planners imagined they would need winter clothing or that Soviet resistance would last beyond summer. The Soviets, by contrast, built layer after layer of fallback logistics. Depots set deep behind the front, factories rebuilt far from danger, reserve warehouses stocked with spare parts. When the Germans advanced, they consumed supplies faster than expected. When they stalled, they lost the advantage of mobility. And when winter came, logistics, not bullets, determined fate. The build-up had laid the seeds of both triumph and disaster. In the Pacific, logistics meant something entirely different: distance. Islands separated by thousands of miles forced planners to rethink war entirely. The US Navy built floating supply bases, repair ships, mobile dry docks. Every island captured had to become a stepping stone: fuel depots, airfields, hospitals, ammo dumps. Japan, with limited industrial capacity and fewer merchant ships, struggled to resupply distant garrisons. Many isolated Japanese units later starved because supply routes collapsed. The Pacific buildup was a war of movement, construction, and relentless transport. Whoever controlled the sea lanes controlled survival. Every strategy meeting, every production conference, every supply spreadsheet fed into a single truth: war is motion. Without logistics, motion dies. A tank becomes a metal sculpture. A rifle becomes a stick. A soldier becomes a burden instead of a fighter. Strategists across all nations grappled with this. Some embraced it, others underestimated it. But the coming battle, Stalingrad, El Alamein, Kursk, Normandy, would expose every logistical strength and every weakness with merciless clarity. The build-up was nearing its peak. Factories glowed like furnaces. Rail cars rattled across continents. Convoys sliced through dark waters hunted by submarines. The world tightened, waiting for explosion. The last stage of the strategic build-up was psychological. Commanders knew that logistics were not glamorous. Soldiers didn't cheer for supply depots. Leaders didn't win medals for inventory management. Yet the success of every grand strategy rested on thousands of quiet hands: drivers, mechanics, clerks, engineers, railway crews, mariners hauling cargo through storms and torpedoes. These people rarely appear in battlefield narratives, yet they shaped them more than anyone realized. Commanders prepared, armies positioned, supplies flowed into staging zones, plans converged into the razor-sharp moment before action. And then silence. The deep breath before the battlefield ignites. Germany's plans rested on speed. The Allies' plans rested on endurance. The Soviets' plans rested on depth. 3 visions, 3 philosophies, 3 logistical worlds colliding under the weight of a global war. The build-up was finished. The war machine was loaded, fueled, armed, and waiting. All that remained was the moment when strategies transformed into reality, when logistics would disappear beneath explosions, only to reappear later as the hidden force deciding victory. The storm was seconds away. Across airfields, engines warmed. On railways, final shipments raced. In ports, cranes swung crates into hulls. Commanders delivered final orders. Staff officers whispered last-minute warnings. Mechanics tightened bolts, inspected tracks, fueled engines. Soldiers stared into the distance, wondering what waited beyond the horizon. History was about to accelerate beyond control. Everything that had been planned, every map, every calculation, every logistical gamble was about to be tested. And only the battlefield would reveal which nations had prepared for the brutal reality of mechanized warfare, and which had not. The strategic build-up of World War II was not just preparation, it was transformation. Entire societies became engines. The world became a single interconnected system of supply lines. Any break, anywhere, rippled across continents. And in this massive humming network, mistakes multiplied at terrifying speed. A single delayed fuel convoy, a miscalculated rail timetable, an overextended armored column. These things would shape battles more than heroism or firepower. Now the war machine stood ready. The next step was collision, steel against steel, nation against nation, logistics against logistics. The quiet war of planning was over. The loud war was about to begin. And so, after months, sometimes years of preparation, the world approached the moment that would expose every weakness and amplify every strength. Commanders stood over maps, tracing final lines. Supply officers double-checked manifests. The gears were turning. The armies were moving. The storm was here. The clash. Battle begins, El Alamein battle. Before dawn, the desert is a silent sea. Nothing moves except the cold wind dragging thin lines of sand across the ground. But beneath that quiet surface lies an army coiled like a steel spring, waiting for the moment it will explode forward. At El Alamein, the front line stretches across barren emptiness, no cover, no forests, no mountains. Just open desert, a place where strategy, courage, and logistics collide in the most unforgiving arena on Earth. Rommel's Afrika Korps holds defensive lines like clenched fists, dug into minefields so dense they are called the Devil's Gardens. Montgomery's 8th Army faces them with a force rebuilt, rearmed, and resupplied on a scale the desert has never seen. Now the hour approaches when the stillness will shatter. Artillery crews breathe on their hands, warming frozen fingers. Tank engines rumble awake like sleeping beasts. Infantry kneel in the shadows, waiting for the order that will rewrite the fate of North Africa. Here in this moment, this inhale before the blow, the desert holds its breath. And then the signal fires. A single flash erupts on the horizon, brief, sharp, unnatural, then another and another. In seconds, the darkness becomes a wall of white fire. British and Commonwealth artillery open up with a bombardment so dense it feels like the desert itself is detonating. The ground trembles under thousands of shells, ripping into the Axis lines. For Rommel's troops, the night transforms into a blinding storm. Sand leaps into the air with every impact, choking visibility. Trenches buckle, telephone lines snap, and men cling to the earth as if the sky is falling. For Montgomery's soldiers, the spectacle is overwhelming, an entire horizon pulsing with fury. But they know this is only the beginning. Behind them, lines of supply trucks wait like veins feeding the assault. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical kits, everything a modern army needs to punch through a fortified desert line. The bombardment continues for hours, never slowing, never giving the defenders a moment to recover. Each shell is a message. The long stalemate is over. Through the smoke, officers whisper the next phase, the infantry advance. The desert is about to ignite. When the guns finally pause, the silence is not relief, it is dread. The ground still vibrates from the barrage, dust drifting like ghostly curtains across the battlefield. Through that haze, the 1st Infantry waves step forward. Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian and British units push in organized lines, weaving through narrow, cleared paths in sprawling minefields. Every step is measured, deliberate. Stray even 1 meter from the taped lanes and the desert could erupt under their boots. Machine gun nests hidden among ridges spot the movement. The first bursts crack the air. Tracers slice across the gloom. The assault begins in earnest. Officers shout coordinates into radios. Field engineers dash ahead, sweeping for mines under fire. Each time they widen a path, more troops pour through. The Axis defenders fire relentlessly, but their lines are shaken, communications strained, and their ammunition stocks already under pressure. Montgomery's attack is not just brute force, it is timed, supplied, and synchronized down to the minute. Every rifleman knows, behind them stands a logistical machine, determined to push them forward. And ahead waits the first fortified ridge. The infantry meets the ridge in a clash of grit and fire. Axis defenders hold the high ground, silhouettes flickering between explosions. Their MG-34s sweep the sand with blistering speed, forcing attackers to drop flat. Mortars thump from hidden pits, sending arcs of steel above the swirling dust. The attackers respond with disciplined bursts. Bren guns chatter rhythmically, covering squads as they crawl forward inch by inch. Grenadiers leap from shallow craters, throwing themselves toward enemy foxholes. But what slows them isn't enemy bullets alone. It is the terrain itself. The desert provides no cover. Every rise exposes them, every dip funnels them. The heat of the day still lingers in the sand, rising in shimmering waves even at night. Behind the front line, supply carriers risk everything to bring forward ammunition. They drive without headlights, guided only by compass and memory. Some never reach the infantry. Artillery fire turns their vehicles into burning silhouettes. but others push through, dropping crates into trembling hands before reversing back into the gloom. Slowly, brutally, the ridge begins to bend under the pressure, but the armor has yet to join the battle. Tank engines rumble from the rear like distant thunder. Montgomery's armored brigades roll forward in tight columns, dust spiraling behind them. Sherman tanks, newly arrived in North Africa, advance beside Grant's and Crusaders, an armored phalanx forged by global supply lines stretching from Detroit to Cairo. The moment they crest the first low dunes, Axis anti-tank guns open fire. Sharp cracks slice the night as 50mm and 88mm rounds streak through the darkness. One shell slams into a Crusader, lifting it in a burst of flame. The crew scrambles out, shadows fleeing across the sand. But the attack does not stop. More tanks spread out, maneuvering at speed. Commanders shout through intercoms, calling targets, adjusting formations. The Axis gunners fire again and again, their ammunition dwindling far faster than expected. Supply trucks meant to reinforce them sit miles behind, trapped by the earlier bombardment. Now the tank duels erupt across the desert, bright flashes, deafening impacts, steel grinding against steel. El Alamein is no longer lines on a map. It is a furnace consuming machines, fuel and willpower, and the battle is only accelerating. While armor clashes in the open, deeper in the minefields another drama unfolds. Engineers crawl under fire, sweat and sand mixing on their faces. Every mine they disarm opens one more artery for reinforcements. Every explosion marks where a man misjudged by inches. Their progress is measured by the rhythm of their tools. Scrape, probe, lift repeated thousands of times in the dark. They know the tanks cannot advance without them. They know the infantry depends on these narrow lifelines carved through the Devil's Gardens. Rommel's defenders unleash sporadic artillery fire, hoping to disrupt the clearing teams. Shells erupt among them, sending showers of sand skyward. But the engineers continue, relentless. Behind them, long lines of vehicles wait to flood through the gaps. Medical trucks, fuel carriers, tank transporters, repair crews, radio vans. The desert battlefield is not only fought at the front, it is fought across miles of interconnected effort. As the final mines detonate and pathways widen, commanders receive the signal they've been waiting for. The armored thrust can begin in full. Montgomery's plan relies on momentum. Once the breach opens, the attack must surge forward before the Axis can react, and so the second wave of armor roars in. Their silhouettes appear like iron beasts rising from a storm, guns pointing toward the fortified positions ahead. The Axis responds with disciplined ferocity. German and Italian anti-tank crews, seasoned by years in the desert, fire with deadly precision. Their guns flash from camouflaged pits, striking the leading tanks. 2 Shermans burn, black smoke curling upward like torn flags. But the weight of numbers now presses heavily. The Commonwealth armor spreads wide, overlapping fields of fire, creating a moving wall of steel. On the ground, infantry advance behind them, taking advantage of each breakthrough. They storm trenches, exchanging close-range volleys, pushing defenders from one ridge to the next. Yet for all this violence, the real struggle is time. Each minute the Axis holds gives their logistics damaged, battered, but not destroyed a chance to regroup. Montgomery cannot allow that. He orders the final phase of the night assault. The desert braces for an explosion of movement. As the moon rises higher, its pale light reveals a battlefield reshaped by fire. Craters scar the sand like open wounds. Burning vehicles cast long shadows. Lines once drawn clean on maps now twist in chaotic patterns. Commonwealth forces push toward their next objective, the Mitiria Ridge, a keystone in Rommel's defensive line. Break it, and the Afrika Korps risks collapse. Defenders dig in stubbornly. German paratroopers, Italian Bersaglieri units and armored detachments form layers of resistance, each determined to buy time. Their logistics have been strained for months, but discipline remains iron. Commonwealth artillery shifts fire, hammering the ridge with a rolling barrage that creeps forward like a living thing. Infantry follow close behind, almost pacing the explosions. One misstep, and they could fall under their own fire, but hesitation is deadlier. When the barrage lifts, the troops charge. Grenades arc through the air, rifles crack, bayonets flash in the rising dust. The ridge becomes a maelstrom, visibility near zero, shapes moving in fits and bursts. The outcome hangs on a knife's edge. But dawn is approaching, and the desert favors those who strike before the sun takes hold. At first light, the battlefield transforms. Shadows shrink, colors sharpen. The heat begins its climb. Under the rising sun, both armies take in the scale of the destruction and the possibilities. Montgomery sees progress, lines breached, positions seized, momentum leaning forward. Rommel's commanders see danger, units fragmented, artillery disrupted, minefields penetrated. But Rommel himself is hundreds of miles away, recovering from illness. His temporary replacement, General Stumer, struggles to coordinate the defense under immense pressure. Communications are frayed, supply trucks remain stuck far to the rear, fuel reserves dwindle dangerously. On the British side, fresh brigades arrive, rolling forward with renewed energy. Their tanks refueled overnight, their ammunition restocked from endless supply convoys feeding the offensive. This is the true difference. An army running on full arteries facing one surviving on narrowed veins. Yet the Africa Corps is not beaten, not yet. They rally around strong points, reposition guns, and prepare counterattacks designed to slow the British advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The desert prepares for a second collision. Mid-morning erupts with violent counterblows. German panzer units, lean but lethal, spear forward. Their Mk3 and Mk4 tanks maneuver with veteran precision, using dunes as cover, striking from unexpected angles. They hit the flank of an advancing British brigade, knocking out several tanks in rapid succession. The sudden attack forces the British to halt and reorient, momentarily stalling Montgomery's tempo. But every kilometer, the panzers move drains precious fuel that cannot be easily replaced. Their logistics officers know each aggressive maneuver is paid for with hours of operational life. British commanders quickly redirect artillery. Shells fall in tight patterns, forcing the panzers to scatter. Soon a swirling tank battle develops, dust clouds rising like towering pillars. Tank crews fire at silhouettes barely visible through the haze. Hits send spray patterns of glowing fragments across the sand. Misses kick up plumes that blind both attacker and defender. It is chaos, but within that chaos lies the turning of pressure. Because the British can replace losses, they can refuel, rearm, and return. The Africa Corps cannot, and every minute widens that gap. Night fades. Dawn ignites the desert in a harsh, blinding glow. As the horizon sharpens, German and Italian observers spot the unmistakable silhouettes of British infantry pushing through the cleared lanes. They raise alarms instantly. Radios crackle. Orders thunder through the Axis lines. Positions prepare for assault. But panic creeps in. The minefields they relied upon for protection have been pierced faster than expected. Artillery crews scramble, slamming shells into breaches, pivoting to track the oncoming shapes. The first Axis salvos roar. Shells shriek across the plain, detonating against rising plumes of dust. British squads hit the ground, reform, advance again. They know the rule. Don't stop, don't bunch, don't give the gunners an easy target. The air trembles. Sand rains. Yet the columns keep moving, cutting through fire like shadows refusing to die. Ahead lies Miteria Ridge, the first real obstacle. Holding it means survival. Losing it means collapse. The British climb. The Axis guns turn red hot. Tension thickens as both sides brace for a collision that will shake the entire North African front, and the ridge becomes a knife edge of fate. But the battle is only beginning. The British armor finally appears behind the infantry, metallic giants rolling forward, engines snarling like beasts released from chains. Crusader tanks, Grants and Shermans, kick up storms of dust as they advance in staggered lines. This is what the infantry has been waiting for, steel reinforcement to break the Axis center. But the tank commanders see trouble immediately. The terrain is too uneven, visibility too thin, and the approach toward the ridge funnels into predictable paths. Axis gunners know this. Anti-tank cannons open fire. The first hits slam into the Crusaders, bursting metal outward in white-hot fragments. But the tanks keep pushing. Commanders bark orders, drivers wrench their controls, gunners fire at muzzle bursts, spraying shells through haze. The desert becomes a brutal exchange of wills. Each tank that falls becomes a burning pillar. Each gap it leaves is filled by another machine grinding forward. The British advance becomes a rolling wall of determination, powered by decades of logistical preparation. Still, the Axis cannons roar relentlessly. This is the choke point Rommel counted on. This is where he plans to bleed Montgomery's assault dry. But Montgomery has planned deeper. The pressure mounts. To the north, the 9th Australian Division charges forward with extraordinary speed. Their mission? Smash into the well-fortified German 164th Division and prevent them from reinforcing the centre. Machine guns spit lines of fire across the sand. Mortar shells burst overhead. The Australians dive, roll, sprint, a dance of survival under brutal precision. But their momentum is unstoppable. They've trained for this moment, studied every trench, every ridge, every suspected bunker. Logistics ensured they had maps, intelligence, and ample supplies. Now those quiet numbers and crates transform into raw battlefield momentum. The Australians reach the first line of Axis defences. Grenades arc. Sand explodes. Soldiers pour into trenches with fierce determination. The Germans fight back hard, refusing to yield a single metre. Shots echo down narrow dugouts. Dust coats every breath. The struggle becomes close, tense, desperate, but the Australians hold the initiative. If they can fracture the northern line, the entire Axis formation will feel the shockwave. But German reserves are already stirring, preparing to strike back with sudden force. The desert trembles with the coming counterblow. In the centre, where the fighting is fiercest, British engineers perform acts bordering on madness. Under fire, they crawl through partially cleared minefields to widen the narrow passages cut during the night. Without these lanes, the armoured divisions behind them will choke into immobility. Bullets crack overhead. Explosions shake the ground. But the engineers keep working, hands steady, eyes scanning for the slightest glint of metal beneath sand. One wrong touch could erase an entire team. A mine detonates nearby, a brutal shockwave that flings bodies to the ground. The survivors rise instantly and continue. Their movements are the quiet heroism of warfare, unseen, critical, and fueled by raw discipline. Behind them, tank engines rumble impatiently, waiting for space to break free. If the engineers succeed, the armoured push will continue. If they fail, the entire assault freezes in the minefields, a death sentence. Montgomery's plan, built on layers of timing, supplies, and precision, hangs on these men crawling through hell. They inch forward, defying every danger, because the next phase demands open lanes, or all momentum dies. Axis artillery begins a coordinated barrage designed to crush the British foothold. Batteries fire in calculated rhythms, walking explosive patterns across the desert. Their goal, sever the link between British infantry and tanks. Shells slam into the sand, carving craters into the advancing lines. Communication becomes almost impossible. Radio operators shout into static. Runners sprint through chaos with messages clutched to their chests. Montgomery's forces stagger under the impact. Dust clouds swallow entire platoons. The desert becomes a storm of deafening blasts. Yet the British push continues, inch by inch, moment by moment. In forward observation posts, Axis spotters track the movements, calling adjustments with cold precision. They know that breaking this assault is the only way to protect the fragile supply lines feeding the Panzer Army. But the British artillery answers back. Counter-battery fire screams across the horizon, smashing into Axis gun pits. A duel begins. A brutal, invisible battle of calculations and trajectories. Both sides know this. Whoever controls the artillery controls the battle. The desert shakes like a living beast caught between giants, and neither giant intends to fall. The first British Sherman tanks finally crest the rise toward Materia Ridge, only to face a deadly surprise. Concealed anti-tank positions dug into the reverse slope. The Germans have spent months preparing these kill zones. The Shermans advance unknowingly, then a blaze of fire. Long-barreled 50mm and 75mm guns ignite the ridge with catastrophic accuracy. Sherman after Sherman takes direct hits, metal folding inward. The British tank crews react instantly. Turrets swivel. Gunners fire high explosive shells into suspected positions. Drivers swerve violently across rough sand, trying to break the firing solutions of enemy gunners. But the ridge is a death funnel. Still, some Shermans reach cover positions and begin returning disciplined fire. Their rounds crash into Axis foxholes, smashing bunkers and ripping through sandbag lines. A brutal exchange unfolds, a contest of armor, nerves, and logistics. Every shell fired carries a chain: factories, rail lines, convoys, depots. And every hit delivered reflects that chain's power. The ridge becomes a cauldron of smoke and flame, and somewhere in the haze the battle's direction begins to shift. Italian Bersaglieri units, renowned for their speed and discipline, surge forward to plug gaps forming in the Axis line. Their officers shout commands through drifting dust. They know the stakes. If the British break through here, the entire front could unravel. They sprint across exposed ground, rifles tight to their chests, seeking new defensive positions. British infantry spot the movement and unleash suppressing fire. Bullets hiss past the Italians as they dive behind rocks and dunes. The fight becomes a rapid exchange of volleys, sharp, intense, unrelenting. The Italians hold firmly, anchoring their sector with sheer determination. But the weight of British logistics presses against them relentlessly. More men, more ammunition, more coordination. Still, they refuse to give ground. Their resilience buys precious minutes for German armored units to reposition behind them. In the desert, minutes can be worth divisions, and these minutes may determine whether Rommel's defensive line holds or fractures under the onslaught. The counterstroke is forming in the shadows. From the southwest, German Panzer IVs begin rolling into position. Their engines rumble low, almost predatory. Dust trails curl behind them like the wake of advancing storms. The tank commanders observe the battlefield through narrow slits, analyzing the chaos with practiced calm. They've seen desert warfare turn on seconds, and they intend to seize those seconds. They form up in staggered lines, preparing for a coordinated strike against the advancing British armor. Their doctrine is clear: hit fast, hit hard, disrupt momentum. But something feels off. The British assault isn't collapsing under pressure as expected. Instead, it grows. More armor, more infantry, more artillery. An endless flow of resources fueled by the Allies' vast logistical engine. Still, the panzer commanders signal the advance. Tracks churn sand. Turrets lock forward. The desert prepares for a collision of metal and fire, a duel between steel titans whose outcome could decide the entire battle. The clash of armor is moments away. The two armored forces close the distance like predators circling the same kill. British Shermans grind forward, turrets twitching. German Panzer IVs maneuver with disciplined precision, seeking flanking angles. Then, the first shots. A panzer cannon flashes. A British tank erupts in smoke. Sherman gunners answer instantly, launching high explosive shells that burst across the dunes. The battlefield becomes a brutal, swirling geometry. Lines, arcs, reactions, counters. Every move matters, every miscalculation is fatal. Tank commanders shout corrections. Loaders slam shells. Drivers weave violently to break the enemy's aim. Dust blinds. Shells scream. Armor plates ring like struck anvils. This isn't a clean tank duel. It's chaos sculpted by sheer will. But numbers matter. British logistics have delivered more tanks, more fuel, more ammunition. For every Sherman knocked out, another pushes forward. The panzer line begins to bend, not break, not yet. But cracks appear, thin as hairlines, real as fate. And British infantry is closing fast behind, ready to exploit any fracture. Amid the armor clash, German anti-tank guns reposition with astonishing discipline. Crews drag equipment by hand, sweating under a blazing sun, determined to create new firing arcs. They set quickly, driving stakes into sand, adjusting elevation wheels with frantic focus. Then they open fire. Long, sharp blasts hammer into the British advance. Shermans stagger, Crusaders veer aside, smoke pillars rise like twisted monuments. But British artillery answers in waves. Heavy guns pound the Axis positions, throwing up geysers of sand. Anti-tank crews duck, sprint, reappear, fight on. It becomes a deadly dance between exposed men and armored giants. Still they hold, their precision slowing the British push just enough for German armor to realign. This is the razor's edge, the thin line between a disciplined defense and catastrophic collapse. Rommel built his reputation on battles like this, using fewer resources to hold off greater numbers through timing and skill. But even the desert fox cannot command the impossible forever. The pressure continues to mount, grain by grain, shot by shot. To the far north, the Australians maintain their relentless assault. They push trench by trench, bunker by bunker, their momentum cutting into the German 164th Division's defences like chisels against stone. Machine gun nests erupt. Australians drop, roll and surge forward again. Grenades burst in thundering flashes. They overwhelm one bunker, then another. The Germans regroup, sending disciplined volleys down narrow approaches. For a moment, the attack stalls, the desert choking with smoke and fear. Then the Australians surge once more, driven by training, coordination and the steady supply chain feeding them uninterrupted ammunition. This isn't merely courage, it's logistics on foot. And slowly, the northern flank begins to warp under the strain. Not break, not yet, but tremble, just enough for Montgomery's staff officers to sense an opportunity forming across the entire front. The smallest fractures can reshape entire battles. Back near Mitiria Ridge, British infantry fight yard by yard for control of the high ground. Every inch is contested. Every mound of sand holds hidden rifles and concealed pits. The Axis defenders hurl grenades down the slopes. The British respond with smoke rounds climbing under cover of swirling grey clouds. Bayonets glint, sand sprays, voices shout through the haze. But slowly, painfully, British troops gain the crest. From this vantage they spot Axis troop movements, artillery flashes, and tank formations gathering for counterattacks. Their radios buzz with reports. Their forward observers lock coordinates. A storm of British artillery follows. Shells rain across Axis positions, tearing through defensive lines and forcing commanders to shift units prematurely. The ridge, once a shield for the Axis, becomes a perch for Allied eyes. A breakthrough isn't here yet, but the ingredients are forming. The desert's balance is tilting grain by grain. Rommel, still sick and far from the front, receives fragmented reports of the battle's scale. The British attack is larger than expected. Their supply flow seems endless. Their artillery coordination is unnervingly precise. He senses the danger immediately. From afar he issues urgent directives. Move reserves forward, reinforce armour concentrations, prepare counter-strikes at vulnerable British salients. His staff officers scramble to execute the orders. Trucks roar across sand, kicking up long plumes. Radio chatter spikes, maps shake under frantic hands. But behind every German movement lies a shadow, dwindling supplies. Fuel tanks are half full, ammunition stocks thin, replacement parts nearly non-existent. The British are bleeding too, but their pipelines run full and uninterrupted. Rommel fights with brilliance, Montgomery fights with abundance, and the battlefield begins to show the difference. The first signs of a logistics war taking shape. British sappers advance again to widen the minefield corridors. They now operate under even heavier fire, as Axis forces realize these men are the key to halting the armored surge. Snipers target them. Machine gun bursts sweep across the sand. Mortar rounds fall like iron rain. Still they crawl forward. They probe the earth with calm precision, uncovering mines built to tear apart tanks. They defuse them, mark them, clear them. Behind them, British armour idles impatiently, engines sullen in the heat. Another corridor opens, then another. Tank commanders receive the signal and begin rolling through, widening the spearhead aimed straight at the Axis centre. The minefields, once Rommel's strongest defensive shield, are turning porous. Montgomery's plan is unfolding exactly as intended. Steady pressure, controlled advance, overwhelming supply. Now the real test begins. The armoured punch is about to break free. British infantry now link with advancing armour, forming tight assault groups designed to overwhelm isolated Axis pockets. The cooperation between tanks and troops is smooth, a result of months of training and reliable communication equipment delivered through a functioning supply chain. They move like a coordinated machine. Tanks suppress enemy strongpoints with heavy fire. Infantry follow behind, clearing trenches and pushing deep into defensive belts. German machine guns spit lines of bullets, but each position is gradually smothered by combined fire. Still, resistance remains fierce. Several British squads are forced to ground as sudden bursts of Axis artillery crash around them. Tanks pivot, firing back, shielding their infantry partners. The push continues, slow but unstoppable. The Axis centre is bending again, stretched thinner with every hour. And the British know that once the panzers are forced into a full retreat, the entire front could unravel. Momentum gathers like a storm over the desert. A sudden dust cloud rises to the west. German armoured cars and reconnaissance units speeding forward to probe for weaknesses in the British advance. Their mission is simple: identify the exposed flanks, locate thin points, and exploit them before they solidify. They weave through dunes like desert hawks, but British anti-tank teams are waiting. Piat launchers thump, mortars drop, machine gun lines trace arcs across the sand. Several Axis vehicles burst into flames, others retreat, leaving smoke trails behind. The reconnaissance attempt fails, and with it, Rommel loses the chance to understand the full scale of Montgomery's deployment. This lack of visibility becomes another crack in the armour of Axis planning. The British, meanwhile, map every shift in Axis formations through a web of observers and intelligence units. Information shapes battles as much as bullets, and the British have both in plenty. The battlefield grows more uneven by the hour. German artillery shifts positions rapidly to avoid counter-battery fire. Crews push their cannons through sand, repositioning for fresh angles. They fire, relocate, fire again, a desperate rhythm to stay alive under overwhelming Allied pressure. Their shells crash into British concentrations, slowing advances, fracturing formations. But each move drains fuel. Each shot drains ammunition. And supply trucks struggle to keep pace, rattling through dangerous corridors under constant threat from British aircraft patrolling the skies. Fuel shortages begin to bite. Several guns fall silent, not destroyed but dry. The contrast is stark. British guns thunder without pause, fed by full depots and efficient supply lines. The artillery duel shifts decisively, not through superior tactics, but superior logistics. And across the front, Axis units feel the tightening jaws of disadvantage. The battlefield's rhythm is changing. The sun climbs higher, bleaching the desert into a blinding palette of gold and white. Heat shimmers distort entire battalions, making tanks waver like mirages. Both sides sweat, choke, endure, but only one side is resupplied with cold water, fresh bandages, spare parts, and ammunition. British supply trucks rumble forward without pause. German trucks arrive thinner, later, fewer, sometimes not at all. Frontline medics notice it first. They radio headquarters: no stretchers, no morphine, no clean water. Officers notice next. Their ammunition counts dip too quickly. Soldiers whisper what everyone is thinking, but no one wants to admit. The desert is starving them. Meanwhile, British infantry now move with renewed confidence, fueled by consistent supplies. Their attacks sharpen, their timing tightens, their momentum builds. They sense the Axis weakening, not from bravery or fear, but from scarcity. And scarcity crushes armies faster than bullets. On the ridgelines, British forward observers scan the Axis depth with binoculars. Every movement is catalogued, relayed, exploited. An ammunition truck races across a dune, coordinates sent. Moments later, a British artillery barrage converts the truck into a fireball. A German gun crew sprints to relocate, too late. They vanish in a column of sand and smoke. The efficiency is uncanny. British gunners, supplied in abundance, fire without hesitation. German batteries, by contrast, ration shells carefully, sometimes firing single rounds where British crews unleash dozens. This uneven exchange eats at Axis morale. One German officer mutters, "They shoot as if the desert were their warehouse." In a way it is. British logistics have turned North Africa into a flowing corridor of resources, while the Axis fight from shrinking pockets of fuel and ammunition. The artillery war tilts further with every hour. As the British push deeper, they encounter hardened Italian strongpoints, dug-in positions shielded by rock outcrops and reinforced trenches. Italian gunners unleash accurate volleys, forcing British infantry to scatter. For a moment the line holds, but the British answer with coordinated precision. Mortar fire softens the defences, tanks swing around to flank, infantry charges through the gaps. Italian units fight with resilience, but the weight of British pressure pushes them back. Radio messages fly in desperation, requesting ammunition. The response is silence, or a single phrase dreaded across the Axis front. Unavailable. Without supplies, bravery becomes a brittle shield. British forces overrun the position after a prolonged struggle. The fall of each Axis strongpoint is more than tactical. It is symbolic, signalling a slow erosion of an entire army's operational breathing room, and the British are far from finished. In the centre, British tank formations advance again, rolling through newly cleared corridors. Their engines roar in unison, kicking up vast plumes of dust. Ahead, German panzer units attempt a counterattack, not reckless but brilliantly timed. They strike the British spearhead from the side, shells slamming into exposed armour. Two Shermans ignite instantly, but the British absorb the hit and respond. Their rear elements move up quickly, forming defensive arcs. Anti-tank guns open fire, their shots cracking like thunder. The desert becomes a maelstrom of smoke, steel and ricochets. For minutes the outcome hangs in balance. Then British reinforcements, plentiful, fresh, fueled, arrive. The German attack loses momentum as fuel gauges dip and ammunition belts run thin. Rommel's doctrine demands mobility, but mobility evaporates without supply. The counterattack falters, one shell short at a time. A British tank breaks through a thin section of the Axis line, its treads grinding over sandbags and shattered equipment. It fires point-blank into a fortified position, detonating an ammunition stash. The explosion ripples outward, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. British infantry surge into the breach, capturing prisoners, clearing trenches, and widening the gap. For the first time, Axis troops begin to withdraw in small groups, organized but clearly strained. German officers bark orders to hold. Italian officers plead for resupply. But the sand offers no answers. British units exploit every weakness with clockwork discipline. Each yard gained forces the Axis to stretch their lines more thinly. And stretched lines in the desert are invitations for collapse. The breach grows wider, and the pressure grows heavier. The night approaches again, and with it, a renewed British assault. Montgomery has learned the rhythm of El Alamein: attack at dusk, hammer at night, deny the Axis the daylight they rely on. British searchlights sweep the battlefield, illuminating key points. Tracer rounds carve red arcs through the dark. German and Italian units fight desperately, firing from every shadowed dune. But British night fighting training pays off. Their equipment, especially their radios and illumination tools, keeps coordination tight even in darkness. Axis units, already low on supplies, struggle to match the tempo. What begins as a clash becomes a relentless grind. And as the night deepens, German officers realize something terrifying. The British are still fresh. Section 4 is far from over. The night has only begun. Midnight. The desert is a furnace of muzzle flashes. British infantry surge toward a fortified ridge called Kidney Ridge, a linchpin of the Axis defense. German machine gun teams unleash precise bursts, forcing British troops to scatter. For minutes, it appears the British attack might break. Then British artillery joins the fight. Dozens of guns pound the ridge, walking fire across the slopes with mathematical precision. The ground trembles, sand erupts, entire bunkers vanish in plumes of dust. When the barrage lifts, British infantry charge again, determined, supplied, relentless. The ridge holds barely. Axis defenders cling to their positions through grit and discipline, but their ammunition is down to fractions and replacements never arrive. The battle for Kidney Ridge is bleeding both sides, but only one side can afford to bleed. Far to the south, New Zealand and South African troops advance in synchronized formation. Their goal: cut into the deeper Axis defensive belts and threaten the supply roads behind the main lines. Axis units defend stubbornly, using every trench, crater and rock formation as cover. The fighting is fierce, close and constant, but the British Commonwealth troops move with unbroken energy. Their logistics lines, though stretched, remain intact. Hot meals arrive, water arrives, ammunition flows. For Axis troops in the south, the contrast couldn't be more painful. Their resupply columns shrink with every passing hour. The southern front isn't collapsing, not yet, but the strain is visible, like a rope pulled one thread short of snapping. And the British advance continues, determined to pull harder. British engineers now work through the night to expand supply corridors. They drop wooden planks across soft patches, repair tank tracks, set up temporary depots, and guide vehicles forward with steady efficiency. Every illuminated tent, every fuel drum, every water truck represents victory in the making. Behind them, Axis depots burn. British bombers have targeted them relentlessly, cutting Rommel's supply arteries. Now every drop of fuel is precious. Every artillery shell must be justified. Every repair is a gamble. The Axis fight with skill. The British fight with abundance. And that difference is beginning to calcify across every corner of the battlefield. The stage is set for the operation's most decisive push. Rommel's stand-in commanders order another counterattack, hoping to slow the British advance and buy precious hours for supplies that may or may not arrive. German panzers surge forward under cover of the dark, their silhouettes black against the dim horizon. They strike hard, catching a British infantry company by surprise. Machine guns rake the sand. Mortars burst overhead. The British stagger but do not break. Within minutes, reinforcements arrive. Tanks, anti-tank guns, infantry, all flowing seamlessly through the maintained corridors. The counterattack loses its sting as soon as British firepower gathers. German tanks begin to withdraw, slow and measured, saving themselves for battles where supplies might favor them more. But those battles are fading from the horizon. The British momentum is becoming impossible to reverse. Battle begins. Dawn breaks again, pale and washed out over the desert. British forces have pushed deep into the Axis line, consolidating gains overnight. Tank crews emerge from dust clouds, scouting forward, gunners scanning for the slightest glint of movement. Infantry move behind them like shadows cast by steel, securing each captured trench, bunker, and crater. The Axis line is frayed, stretched, and overstretched. Small pockets of resistance remain, but supply shortages cripple their effectiveness. Rommel's command posts are frantic, his dispatches increasingly desperate. The desert favors those who can feed men, guns, and vehicles, and Montgomery's machine hums with efficiency. Every mile gained increases tension. Every captured ridge transforms the desert into a stage for the final confrontation. The Axis front is bending, but they are not yet broken, and both commanders know that the next moves will define the battle's fate. The push toward the heart of the Axis line continues, inch by precious inch. British artillery pounds remaining defensive positions with relentless rhythm. Shells crash through sand and stone, sending plumes high into the sky. Gunners adjust quickly, correcting aim from the reports of forward observers. Every round fired has been supplied, moved, and calculated, a visible manifestation of logistics in action. Axis units, by contrast, fire sporadically. Ammunition is limited, every shot must count. Small squads begin to fall back under pressure, their morale fraying as supply and communication fail them. The desert hums with tension, a taut wire stretched over fire and dust. British tanks pivot into newly cleared lanes, slamming into weak points with crushing force. Axis infantry fights with courage, but courage alone cannot replace dwindling bullets, empty fuel tanks, and silent guns. The lines are bending closer to breaking. The turning point is near. A British officer climbs a dune, binoculars pressed to eyes, observing the Axis command movement. He notes every unit, every gun, every reserve troop shifting uneasily. Montgomery's staff channels the intelligence immediately. Orders fly. Concentrate armor here, push infantry there, artillery barrage to soften the ridge before the assault. Everything converges with precision. At the ridge's base, British tanks prepare for a coordinated strike. Infantry tighten their formations, ready to exploit the slightest gap. The Axis commanders sense it. The net is closing. Rommel's calculations are limited by reality. Lack of supplies, stretched lines, exhausted troops. The desert becomes an arena of attrition, timing, and absolute logistics. The battle is at its crescendo. The storm is about to break. Suddenly, British tanks roar forward in unison. Engines scream, tracks grind over sand and obstacles. Infantry surge behind, covering each vehicle, exploiting gaps with coordinated precision. Axis anti-tank crews fire desperately, but their efforts are piecemeal, poorly coordinated, hindered by lack of ammunition. One by one, positions collapse under the combined assault. Shermans and Crusaders punch through the ridge, flames licking the sand from destroyed bunkers. British artillery follows relentlessly, smashing any secondary positions before they can regroup. The Axis is forced into a continuous fallback, retreating under pressure, attempting to maintain cohesion. Desert dust fills the air, a haze of chaos, smoke, and the sound of engines, the heartbeat of the battle. Every advance, every position seized, tells the story of preparation, supply, and strategy, turned into unstoppable force. The turning point approaches. Soon, victory or retreat will be decided. British engineers now secure the ridges and repair destroyed lanes for follow-up armor and supplies. Their work allows tanks to advance deeper, ensuring momentum doesn't stall. Every truck that rumbles forward brings fuel, shells, water, and medicine, a chain reaction of survival and offense. Axis units, exhausted and low on supplies, cannot match this rhythm. They fight bravely, but strategically are trapped. Their lines stretched, reserves thin, ammunition dwindling. Montgomery watches through binoculars, calm and deliberate, orchestrating the next phase. The British advance continues with terrifying efficiency, a direct testament to the unseen army of logistics behind each soldier, gun, and vehicle. Axis morale falters. Desert heat presses like an unrelenting hand. Rommel's gamble, brilliant as it was, cannot overcome the material reality facing him. The desert is about to decide who holds El Alamein. The final morning arrives. British forces prepare for the decisive push. Every unit knows the importance. Break the Axis line, and the path to Egypt opens. Fail, and the desert will consume the attack. Infantry, tanks, artillery, engineers, every component moves with clockwork coordination. The Axis, stretched beyond endurance, braces for the inevitable. Shells scream, tanks charge, soldiers surge. In moments, positions that stood for months crumble under combined might. Axis retreats become structured withdrawals, measured but forced by logistical impossibility. The British hold the field, their preparation, supply chains, and relentless coordination proving decisive. El Alamein begins to tilt toward Allied victory, a testament to the unseen power that often wins wars: logistics, timing, and meticulous planning. The first great turning point of the North African campaign is upon us. The turning point. The morning sun burns over the desert, relentless and merciless. British forces have seized Meticulously Ridge, cracking the backbone of Rommel's defenses. For hours, Axis troops have fought desperately, retreating in small, controlled increments. But cracks are widening. Supply lines are overextended, fuel is running low, ammunition dwindles, morale falters. Montgomery watches the battlefield like a maestro, orchestrating every movement with precision. Every artillery shell, every tank maneuver, every infantry advance is a calculated step in a dance choreographed for maximum effect. Rommel, sick and miles from the front, receives fragmented reports, every dispatch signaling worsening conditions. The British are stronger than expected, one officer whispers over a crackling radio. Even the Desert Fox cannot overcome the limitations imposed by depleted logistics. The scales begin to tip. One ridge, one captured bunker, one broken line at a time. The Axis army feels the slow squeeze of inevitability. The battle is about to turn. The momentum now belongs to Montgomery's forces. The northern flank becomes the fulcrum. Australian and South African divisions press forward, exploiting gaps created by overnight British gains. They move swiftly, coordinated, supplied with precision. Every platoon has water, ammunition, and reinforcements at hand. Axis defenders attempt to regroup, forming secondary defensive lines, but their efforts falter. German armored units try a counter-push toward the ridge, hoping to stabilize the front. But a critical mistake occurs. Insufficient reconnaissance allows British artillery to zero in with devastating effect. A panzer squadron halts in an exposed valley, shredded by shell fire. Axis infantry, pinned from both front and rear, begin to withdraw in disarray. The desert favors the prepared, Montgomery's staff notes tersely. The tide shifts not through heroics alone, but because one side can keep its men fed, armed, and moving, while the other cannot. The Axis line begins to unravel. Victory is slipping through Rommel's fingers. Air observation reports confirm the scale of the collapse. British artillery and supply corridors enable rapid exploitation of weaknesses. Axis reserves, delayed by damaged roads and fuel shortages, cannot arrive in time to stabilize threatened sectors. British armor surges forward again, hitting the exposed southern flank. Panzer IVs attempt to counter, but their fuel tanks are nearly empty. Ammunition stocks dwindle. Every movement is strained, every shot rationed. The British, by contrast, flow like a river of steel and sand. Tanks, infantry, engineers, artillery, all synchronized. A historian later summarizes, El Alamein was not won in courage alone. It was won in logistics, in anticipation, in relentless supply. The Axis army feels the first true taste of collapse. Positions that were once impenetrable crumble under the weight of coordinated assault. Montgomery's gamble, patience, preparation, and timing pays off. The battlefield tilts decisively. The turning point is underway. A key moment occurs near the northern approach. Australian troops encounter a fortified Axis strongpoint, blocking their path. German infantry are dug in, ready and determined. They fire with precision, delaying the advance. But British artillery responds with careful calculation. Bunker after bunker is neutralized. Sand erupts in clouds of smoke. British tanks follow, exploiting the breach. Axis defenders, already low on supplies and exhausted, are forced to withdraw. The northern corridor opens, a direct path to the heart of the Axis lines. Rommel attempts to redirect forces, but his reserves are scattered, delayed, and underfueled. Montgomery's forces exploit the gap immediately, pressing the advantage with relentless speed. One miscalculated move, one exhausted unit, one lack of fuel, and the line fractures. The Axis defensive structure begins to collapse like sand slipping through fingers. Meanwhile, Materia Ridge, now in British hands, serves as an observation point and artillery base. From here, every movement of Axis troops is noted, relayed, and targeted. British gunners adjust firing solutions with deadly precision. Ammo flows freely to the front. Engineers repair damaged tracks. Infantry reinforce gaps instantly. Axis forces attempt a local counterattack, but every effort is blunted by superior coordination and supply. One panzer unit hits a British minefield, immobilized. Another runs out of fuel halfway to the ridge. Rommel's plan, brilliant as it was, depends on mobility. Without fuel, without reinforcements, without ammunition, mobility becomes impossibility. The tide has shifted irreversibly. The battle's momentum, once contested, now belongs to Montgomery. The decisive push is imminent. The Allies are about to break the Axis in North Africa. By midday, Axis defensive cohesion collapses. Small pockets of resistance fight valiantly, but cannot stop the advancing British formations. Supply shortages, fatigue, and continuous pressure sap the will to hold. Montgomery orders the final phases of the coordinated assault: armor to exploit gaps, infantry to encircle weakened units, artillery to suppress potential counterattacks. Axis forces retreat in a calculated but desperate withdrawal, attempting to preserve what remains of their army. The battlefield bears the marks of relentless pressure: dust clouds, cratered dunes, scattered vehicles. Yet the British, sustained and coordinated, continue to advance with momentum that cannot be halted. It is the moment that defines El Alamein, the turning point where strategic planning, logistics, and timing converge to dictate victory. And from this point onward, the desert will never look the same. Reflection and analysis. El Alamein offers a profound lesson. Wars are not won solely by courage or firepower. Logistics dictate the rhythm, tempo, and reach of armies. Montgomery's mastery lay not in audacity alone, but in anticipation, foreseeing every obstacle, every need, every moment when men, tanks, and artillery must converge. Fuel, ammunition, food, and water, these invisible threads wove the fabric of victory. Rommel's brilliance shone, yet brilliance cannot overcome scarcity. The desert, vast and merciless, magnifies every failure, every delay. A single miscalculated supply line can undo months of planning. And in the harsh arithmetic of North Africa, Montgomery's lines never faltered, while Rommel's creaked under pressure. El Alamein became a battlefield not just of men, but of preparation and persistence. The first lesson is clear. Logistics are as decisive as tactics. Command decisions hinge on information. Montgomery's extensive reconnaissance, radio communications, and air observation allowed rapid adaptation. Every shift in Axis deployment was noted and exploited. Rommel, hampered by illness and fractured reports, could not respond with equal precision. Historians often emphasize tactics, yet El Alamein underscores planning and intelligence as extensions of logistical capability. A general without supply is a general without options. Montgomery's foresight ensured that every advance, every attack, and every artillery barrage was supported. The battlefield was a chessboard, and the supply lines were the pieces that made each move possible. The second lesson: information amplifies logistics and transforms potential into power. Leadership emerges in extremes. Montgomery commanded with patience and discipline, understanding that rushing assaults without preparation would squander gains. Rommel demonstrated adaptive brilliance, improvising under pressure, yet was constrained by resources and distance. The contrast illustrates a timeless truth. Even genius cannot overcome systemic weaknesses. The desert demanded endurance and foresight. Supplies dictated maneuvering. Timing dictated success. Every officer from the ridge to the front relied on reliable logistics to execute orders. Victory favors not only the brave, but the prepared. Leadership, logistics, and planning converge, shaping the fate of armies. Technology amplifies capability only when integrated with supply and strategy. Tanks, artillery, and aircraft delivered overwhelming power at El Alamein. But without fuel and ammunition, even the most formidable weapon is inert. British forces exemplified this principle. Each Sherman, every gun, every radio was not only present, but operational, maintained, and sustained. Axis equipment, often identical or superior in skill, faltered when supply chains failed. El Alamein demonstrates that technology is conditional. Effectiveness depends on the unseen flow of resources. The third lesson is unmistakable. Power without sustainment is fleeting. Morale mirrors material conditions. Soldiers fight hardest when fed, rested, and armed. Exhaustion and scarcity erode cohesion. British troops, consistently supplied, fought with confidence, advancing mile by mile. Axis soldiers, fatigued and undersupplied, fought bravely but could not overcome structural disadvantages. The desert magnified these disparities. Heat, dust, and exposure punished the unprepared. Victory, then, was not only tactical but systemic, a function of endurance, coordination, and human capacity maintained through logistics. The human element is inseparable from preparation and supply. El Alamein reshaped North Africa. Strategic positions secured, momentum gained, Axis forces forced to retreat, all consequences of meticulous planning. It illustrates a central truth of warfare. The battlefield is shaped as much by warehouses, supply trucks, and planning rooms as by trenches and tanks. Montgomery's triumph was not sudden, but cumulative, a culmination of foresight, coordination, and relentless pressure. Rommel's brilliance dazzled, but brilliance without sustainment cannot endure. Historians reflect on this. El Alamein is less a story of audacity alone, more a testament to the operational art of war. And with these insights, we turn to the epic closing, where the desert's lessons echo beyond the battlefield. Epic closing. The desert stretches endlessly, golden and merciless, as if keeping silent witness to the clash of men, steel, and strategy. El Alamein has ended, yet its echoes linger in the dunes. Victory was claimed not only through courage but through preparation, through supply chains, careful planning, and the relentless discipline of an army that could feed, arm, and sustain itself where others could not. Rommel's genius dazzled, yet it could not overcome scarcity. Montgomery's foresight proved decisive. The battle is a testament to the quiet, invisible forces that win wars: logistics, coordination, and foresight. And in the desert, these forces leave marks no cannon can erase. History has witnessed and the sands remember. From the ridges and dunes, the human toll is visible yet measured. Soldiers endured heat, dust, exhaustion, and danger, their courage intertwined with preparation. The battlefield is littered not only with destroyed vehicles and shattered defenses, but with lessons etched into strategy for generations to come. El Alameин's legacy is clear. A well-fed, well-equipped, and well-led force is unstoppable. Supply lines, maps, and meticulous planning often decide the fates of thousands more than a single heroic charge. In these moments, war becomes a chess match, each piece sustained by careful orchestration, each move reinforced by preparation. And the lessons stretch far beyond North Africa. We circle back to the opening question. Could any army survive the desert without constant sustenance and foresight? El Alamein provides the answer. Bravery alone is insufficient. Strategy alone is hollow. Victory belongs to the prepared, those who marshal men, machines, and material into synchronized, relentless advance. The desert, impartial and vast, confirms that truth with every mile of lost terrain, every faltering unit, and every breakthrough fueled by supply. And as the Allied advance continues westward, the impact reverberates across the North African campaign, reshaping the course of war. El Alamein is not just a battle, it is a lesson for all who study history. To the viewer, the lesson is clear. Wars are orchestrated not just on the battlefield but behind the scenes, in warehouses, supply lines, and planning rooms. The men who survive, advance, and triumph are supported by the unseen networks that flow as surely as any river of firepower. Montgomery's orchestration, Rommel's constrained brilliance, and the relentless desert converge into one story. Preparation wins where chance falters. The human spirit, discipline, and ingenuity meet the harsh calculus of logistics, and there, victories are forged. Thank you for journeying across the sands of North Africa with me. If this journey through El Alamein has captivated you, remember, history is alive, layered, and waiting to be explored. Subscribe, comment, and share your thoughts. Every insight brings us closer to understanding the past. Next time, the role of air superiority in WW2. You won't believe what happened there. History warriors. The battlefield may end, but the lessons echo forever.